everybody. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gary Roberson, and I love history and I love science. And most people who know me know that's a big thing for me. And one of the things, I'm also a Christian, and I believe that God has created the earth for mankind. If you go inside, we got a big thing on the wall. This is just a little copy of it. It's a number of things of how the earth is fine-tuned to make it so that advanced life could exist. And there's like 300 or 400 things that have to be exquisitely fine-tuned, or there could be no life on Earth. And there's kind of a parallel. I'm going to make try to make a little parallel of that to Indiana Caverns, because there's a lot of things that had to happen, or there'd be no Indiana Caverns. Where will we start with the story? I guess I could come with a lot of places, but where I'm going to choose to start was when I was 11 years old. I went on my first camping trip with the Boy Scouts to a place called Cave River Valley, and a bunch of us young scouts, we snuck off and crawled into some caves, much against the Scoutmaster's wishes. But after that, I was hooked. I just love caves. And if I hadn't been on that camping trip and hadn't been a Boy Scout, there'd be no Indiana Caverns. So from that day on, I just loved caves, pestered my parents, wanted me to take them to them and everything. So this day I got 16 years old, I got my driver's license. Guess where the first thing I went? I loaded up neighborhood kids. We went back to Cave River Valley, went cave exploring. Got home late. There was a story with the cave, and the back entrance was closed, and I was grounded for 6 months. So it was a bad way to start off my caving career, but it's been that important. I've been waiting 5 years for it. So anyhow, the next thing, I guess it's really a pivotal event, would be when I was a senior in high school. I was taking analytic geometry class. I came into class one of the first days, and the teacher in the class, he says, well, where'd you boys go caving this weekend? And he was talking about my friend Terry Creighton back there. We call him the dog. And I'd never met him, even though we went to the same school. It was a big one. And I found out that Terry was big into cave exploring, and that was a crucial event for me because Terry was a lot more advanced. Little did I know we would go on to develop Squire Bend Caverns, work at Marengo Cave, and then develop Indiana Caverns together. But if I hadn't met Terry, if that teacher hadn't been talking about caving and analytic geometry, there'd probably be no Indiana Caverns, because I might not have met Terry otherwise, and we were getting ready to graduate. So it's amazing how many events have to come together for something to happen sometimes. The next thing on the list is I went to college, and during college, Terry and I, we formed the Indiana Speleological Survey with some other people, and we started mapping in Binkley's Cave. I've been mapping in Binkley Cave, which Indiana Caverns is a part, since I was 20 years old. Well, my senior year, I'd been home on a weekend, long, hard cave trip. I don't remember which one. I got back to college, and I decided to skip class on Monday morning. And so I'm laying in bed at 10 o'clock or something in the morning, sleeping, skipping class, and the phone's ringing. It's a marketing professor. He says, well, not enough people signed up for job interviews with Capital Holding, so he asked me to recommend some of my good students to come over for interviews. Would you like to interview? So I went over and interviewed. Had no idea where I was going. Most people at Vanderbilt wind up all over the world. They don't wind up going home. But because I went to that interview, I got a job with Capital Holding in their finance department, and that brought me home, which allowed me to keep going cave exploring here in Indiana. So the moral of that, for those of you who are in college, if you want to find out what your career is going to be, oversleep class and listen to the phone ring. So I don't know, but to me, you can say that's just a coincidence, but I believe that was something that was orchestrated because it made a huge change in my life. Not only did it bring me home so I could keep exploring in Binkley's, but it also, that job taught me a lot about finance and business, which if you're going to run a small business, you need to know. So it was great preparation. Terry and I kept mapping in Binkley's Cave. In 1971, a guy came to Harvey Binkley, the owner of the historic entrance over here a couple of miles away, and said, I'd like to buy this cave and develop it. And Harvey said, well, you'd have to talk to these boys that are mapping in the cave. And so I was designated to call Fred Conway, so I called him and I said, I got some pictures at home at my mom's house if you want to look at them. So he came to my mom's house, looked at the pictures, went out and bought the cave without ever seeing it. And then he said, well, I need somebody to develop it. So me and Terry and another friend, Ken Hoover from high school, that was also in Caver, we started developing Squire Boone on weekends. And so by meeting Fred Conway, that's how we got in the cave business. I'm one of the few people, there's a few, I mean Gordon Smith, my partner, Marengo is one, but there's very few people who are both cavers and show cave owners, both. But by meeting Fred, that gave us an opportunity. Now incidentally, already by that time, Terry and I were talking about developing a cave, part of Binkley's, but not this part because it hadn't been discovered. So we'd been thinking about this all along, but we didn't know anything. But of course, Terry's one of the few people, he's very unassuming, but he was the key person in developing Squire Boone. None of us had ever developed a cave before, but Terry can do about anything. Just tell him, he'll figure out a way to do it. So when it came time, 40 years later, to develop Indiana Caverns, I said, well, I can do it, but I had to call Terry. I said, I can't do it unless you'll help me. But anyhow, all this just to say these little things that lead you down the directions to where you're going. Now, after we finished Squire Boone, we started, we bought Marengo Cave, and we're working there. And that was going along, but I'm going to kind of make a transition here. When I look back on it, by this time I was in my early 30s. I could see, I was brought up with a good family, went to church on Sundays and so forth, but since I got out of school, I'd walked away, and I could just see my life was gradually going downhill. I wasn't a bad person, but you know, I drank a lot. I didn't buy pot, but I'd smoke it if you gave it to me. And I even bought beer for employees at Marengo Cave when I was the manager when I was young, which you know, it's funny now, but I was going downhill, and I didn't know it. But God was gracious to me, and I wasn't looking for him. But in 1980, I met a young lady named Laura, and when I met her, I knew that God was real. And I don't know why, but after I went on my second date, I went to church all my life, and God wasn't really real to me. But after I met her, I knew there was something out there that I was missing. Well, I'm not going to tell you the story of our courtship or whatever. That's a whole book. Maybe I'll write that book someday. But anyhow, when we got married in 1981, and she's been my partner ever since. And those of you who work with us know we spat back and forth a little bit sometimes. But she is. We could have never taken Marengo Cave to the heights it was, or it still is, without her. And no way could have I done Indiana Caverns without her. So God was gracious to give me somebody that not only reintroduced me to him, but has been able to walk alongside me and support me for the last, let's see, how many is it? It'll be 37 years here in a few more months. Well, eventually we sold out of Marengo. That's another story. But if you read 50 Years Under the Sinkhole Plain, there's a few of the details in there. But it was a great run at Marengo for 28 years. But when I sold it, I felt like it was time to move on. And I thought I was done with the cave industry. I'd spent most of my adult life in it, but I didn't figure I was going to do that. I started doing all kinds of things at church and other things. Got a job running as a CFO at a foster care village. But nothing just seemed to be what I wanted. And I'd always been a person that always did something they could be passionate about, whether it's mapping a cave or developing a cave or whatever. And so after a couple of years, I got thinking, about Binkley Cave again. And I was doing some cave exploring trip, although all us ISS people were getting old and older. So I started talking to Terry about developing part of Binkley's Cave, but nothing came to fruition. We tried several different versions. We talked to landowners, all kinds of things, but just never could get a deal that would work out to come together. Very, very frustrating. This went on from 2003 all the way up to 2012. Well, by the time we got to 2012, I had just about given up. I decided, okay, this is Gary wanting to develop a cave. It must not be you, God, because the door's not open. But little did I know, in 2010, Brad Barkham, Tim Pride, and Shane Miles had found Indiana Caverns. Now, I knew they'd found it, but they'd come in from an entrance 4 hours away. I wasn't up to that trip anymore, so I hadn't seen it. But they finally got a shortcut, and so in 2012, I got to come in from a closer entrance, and just happened to be along on the trip where they connected Binkley and Blowing Hole to make this a really big cave. The same day that we radioed it, found out that Big Bone Mountain was only 25 feet beneath the surface. Then we found out that unlike other parts of the cave that we'd want to develop, instead of being 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 landowners you had to deal with to get the land, one person owned all the land that we needed, Clifford and Dolly Gunther. So that changed everything. Now my buddy Rand Hazlett, I neglected to put this in, but Rand's been caving with us since the mid-'70s. Rand had told me, he said, Gary, I think this part that I've seen back here that I hadn't seen, I think this could make a show cave. So that day I took the trip, even though I didn't know we were going to connect it, I didn't know it was going to be 25 feet below the surface and all. I certainly didn't know where it lay under somebody's land. I was looking. And so all this came together. This was, I believe, February the 11th or 12th of 2012. By the end of March, we'd been able to buy the property from the Gunthers, and by the end of May, we'd raised the money, got the people together, had 4 general partners, which was Laura and I, Bruce Zoller, and Rob Houchins. A lot of you know Rob. And we had we broke ground on May the 28th of 2012. And I know Terry and I were both 65 at that time, so we'd talk to people and said, we're either doing it now or never. Because I think Terry would agree with me, if we waited one more year, we wouldn't have done it. But because that year, the year we developed it, was unbelievably hard. Let's just say it. But if anybody's interested in the story, it's not very good grammatically, but the longest year tells the story of that year. And our plan was, me and Terry, 65, and with young Rand Hazlett, 51 years old. That's 3 of the 5 people, and then we were going to get 2 young people, and we wound up with Ryan Cox, who'd worked at Marengo, and Colin Wykowski, a local guy. So there was 5 of us. We had this whole thing to do. We knew we had to have it done. Our plan was to have it done by the next April. So we gave ourselves 11 months to develop this cave and started it. Well, I think we got about 2 or 3 days, and it turned out that the summer of 2012 was the hottest summer in decades. And I mean, we were literally frying out here. We dug a hole where the basement was supposed to go, and we started working, and then the sun was beating down, and temperature was 106, and the heat factor, I don't know what it was, 112 or 115. We'd have to come in and work at daylight and go home at noon because it was just too hot. So anyhow, it was a really tough year. The good news is we didn't kill anybody, but I have to give God credit for that, because we probably would have if he wouldn't watch after us. We did have some close calls and some things that went on, but again, you'll have to read the book if you want that kind of thing. But anyhow, it wasn't looking good. It looked, I mean, they talk about it being darker before the dawn, but we got up into February and March, and the trail was only done down to like Crayfish Curve. For those of you who know the cave, we had some boats in the cave, but we didn't have it. The dam wasn't built, the trail wasn't built, there wasn't the stairs down to go from Big Bone Mountain. It was just still climb down a ladder to get down into the lower level. And so I didn't think we were going to make it. And then one day Rob Houchins, who's one of the general partners, and he spent most of his life working for Fortune 500 companies as a CFO and going all over the world. And he just showed up. And of course, he had an interest in it, but he just showed up. He wasn't getting paid or anything, and he worked and he helped us get things going. And Laura, she drug anybody in off the street she could find to help, and a lot of them lasted 2 or 3 days, and I don't blame them. I mean, anybody can tell you that worked on it, this was slave labor. I mean, the Israeli slaves building pyramids for the Egyptians it wasn't any harder than probably what we were doing down there. And I'm not trying to, it just was. It was really, really tough. And but with Rob's help, and if he hadn't helped, we wouldn't have made it, because we opened on June the 15th. At 2 o'clock in the morning of that Saturday morning, we were dragging out welding cables. So I mean, it was very, very last minute. And looking back in hindsight, had we not finished the cave, if we'd been a week later, that's about $50,000 less revenue we would have had. We probably would not have been able to pay the bank loan through the first winter. So we got open just in the nick of time. So I told you just a little bit about all the people, some of the people, and everybody that worked on that, whether it's Ryan, Beefy, Hendricks came in, different people, everyone, without their contributions, there would be no Indiana Caverns. But all those things, and I say, if you were in my perspective, you can look back on it, and I feel like God's been orchestrating this thing since I was a little kid. And you know, this was his plan for me. Even when I tried to get away from it after selling out of Marengo, he brought me back to it. So I believe Indiana Caverns is his. He gets all the credit, because if he hadn't intervened at the right times, brought the right people, it wouldn't have happened. So he gets all the glory for it. So that's how we got there. That's how we got open. And we had a great first year. This is 5 years ago. Carol, my sister, she did a great job with the social media, and we had a wonderful first year here in Indiana Caverns. Got off to a great start. Even though we opened late, we had enough money, just enough money to make it through the winter. But what we didn't really know was that the second year, you don't have all those local people coming anymore. You don't have those people driving from all over the United States who just love caves. We found out there's people who just love caves, and so when they found out there was a new one open, and you know they don't open very often, they came from all over. But the second year, we had 30-some-odd thousand people who had been here, but that's all. And the rest, we were unknown through most of our market area. Now compare that. If you're at Marengo, it's been open since 1883. There's probably around 2 million people alive today that have been through Marengo Cave. Because all the caves in Indiana are good, all those people have had a great experience. But so they have 2 million word-of-mouth sales. We had 30,000. That's a distinct disadvantage, besides not having a lot of signs and stuff. So we had to wait. And I knew that the business would come, word of mouth would spread, but it would take time. Well, we were down the second year and third year. It was tough. We made it by, but everybody didn't get paid everything, and we couldn't do everything we wanted to do. Finally, in the second half of 2016, things started to pick up. They accelerated last year, and the business is just doing gangbusters so far in 2018. So we think we've got over that hump. We've got the word of mouth is kicking in. We have a 4.7 TripAdvisor rating, which is almost, there's only 1 or 2 cases in the country that have a higher one. And for those of you who work here, that's not a testament to Indiana Caverns, because we all know it's got a lot of variety and people like that, but it's not the most beautiful cave in the world. It's not the most beautiful cave in Indiana. But we have good people that work here. They like the tours that people give, and we have an awesome reputation, and that's what makes us successful. So that brings us up to date where we are. We've made it through the startup period. We've got to the place where our bank says, hey, we'll let you do something else. So at this point, we thought